Jed Walker walked into the saloon for a drink and saw his face on the wall with a price on his head. He's never stepped foot in this town before, but someone's using his name to kill, and he's got 24 hours to stop it. Jade No Name, Walker drifted into Dusty Gulch like a tumbleweed in a sandstorm. He wasn't looking for trouble, just a quiet drink and a warm place to rest his weary bones before moving on. He'd seen enough towns to know they all tasted the same: dust, dreams, and disappointment. Dusty Gulch wouldn't be any different. His weathered boots crunched on the dirt street as he made his way toward the flickering light of the Rusty Spur Saloon. The piano music spilled out into the night, a promise of temporary escape. Jade pushed through the swinging doors, the scent of stale beer and sawdust hitting him like a wall. The saloon was a typical Western scene: cowboys nursing whiskey, a few card games in progress, and a barkeep polishing glasses with a weary sigh. Jade scanned the room, looking for an empty spot at the bar. That's when he saw it. Pinned to the wall, right next to the House Rules, was a wanted poster. A crude drawing, but undeniably him. The headline screamed, "WANTED, Jed Walker murder." Below the drawing, the reward, $1,500 dead or alive. Jade froze. Murder? He hadn't killed anyone. Not lately anyway, and certainly not in Dusty Gulch. He'd never even been to this forsaken place before tonight. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. Someone was deliberately trying to frame him, but why and who? He took a deep breath, trying to appear nonchalant. But the eyes of the saloon seemed to bore into him, whispers starting to bubble up around him. He was a stranger in town, and now he was a wanted man. Jade knew one thing for sure: his plans for a quiet drink had just gone up in smoke. He was in deep trouble. The wanted poster seemed to burn a hole in Jade's gaze. He had to think fast. Panicking wouldn't solve anything, and running would only confirm their suspicions. He needed information, and he needed it now. He sauntered casually toward the bar, trying to ignore the stares that followed him. He settled onto a stool, the wood creaking under his weight. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, his voice low and steady. The bartender, a burly man with a handlebar mustache and suspicious eyes, slid a glass across the counter. "Heard you're Jed Walker," he said, his voice flat. Jade took a sip of the whiskey, letting it burn down his throat. "That's what they call me," he replied, meeting the bartender's gaze. "The poster says you're a murderer." "Posters can be wrong," Jade said, placing a silver dollar on the counter. "Tell me about this murder. Where did it happen?" The bartender hesitated, wiping down the counter with a rag. "Happened over in Widow's Creek. Old man Henderson found him dead in his cabin." "Widow's Creek," Jade frowned. He'd never been near Widow's Creek. "And they think I did it." "Says you were seen riding away from the cabin that night." Jade's mind raced. Someone had gone to great lengths to make him look guilty. This wasn't just a random act. Someone wanted him out of the picture. But who, and why go through all this trouble? Why not just shoot him in the back? He finished his whiskey, the warmth doing little to ease the chill in his bones. "Thanks for the information," he said, pushing himself off the stool. "I have some questions to ask around town." He turned to leave, but the bartender stopped him. "Be careful, Walker. This town ain't too fond of murderers." Jade gave him a grim smile. "I aim to prove I'm not one." Stepping back out into the dusty street, Jade felt the weight of the town's gaze like a physical burden. The $1,500 bounty hanging over his head was a ticking clock. He knew bounty hunters would be drawn to Dusty Gulch like vultures to a carcass. He had to move fast. He glanced around, trying to decide where to start. The general store seemed like a logical place. People talked there, and news traveled quickly. He crossed the street, the wooden planks of the sidewalk groaning under his boots. As he entered the store, the bell above the door jingled, announcing his arrival. The storekeeper, a skinny man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from behind the counter. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized Jade from the wanted poster. "Can I help you?" the storekeeper asked, his voice tight. "I'm looking for information," Jade said, his voice calm but firm, "about the Henderson murder." The storekeeper hesitated, glancing nervously around the store. "I don't know anything about that," he mumbled, avoiding Jade's gaze. "Someone saw me riding away from Henderson's cabin," Jade pressed, "but I wasn't there. Someone's using my name." The storekeeper remained silent, his face pale. Jade sighed. He wasn't going to get anything out of this man without applying some pressure. "Look," Jade said, leaning closer to the counter, "I didn't kill Henderson. But someone wants me to take the blame. Now, either you tell me what you know, or I'll have to assume you're part of it." The storekeeper swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. I heard some men talking," he stammered. "In the saloon, they mentioned Henderson and a land deal gone wrong." "Who were these men?" Jade asked, his eyes narrowed. I don't know their names," the storekeeper whispered, "but one of them, he wore a fancy silver belt buckle with a star on it." A silver star belt buckle. Jade had seen only one man in Dusty Gulch wearing something like that, Sheriff Brody. Sheriff Brody. The thought hit Jade like a punch to the gut. The sheriff was supposed to uphold the law, not break it, but a land deal gone wrong, it made sense. Henderson probably owned land Brody wanted, and framing Jade was a convenient way to get rid of him. He left the general store, his mind racing. He needed proof. Accusing the sheriff without evidence would be suicide. He decided to head to Widow's Creek. If he could find anything at Henderson's cabin that linked Brody to the murder, he might have a chance. As he walked, he noticed a pair of eyes following him from across the street. A lean man with a rifle slung over his shoulder, a bounty hunter. The word was already out. Jade quickened his pace, trying to blend in with the few people on the street. He needed to get out of town before more bounty hunters arrived. Widow's Creek was a few hours' ride. He needed his horse. He reached the livery stable, the smell of hay and horses filling the air. He found his trusty steed, a sturdy palomino named Goldie, saddled her quickly. As he led Goldie out of the stable, he saw the bounty hunter approaching, blocking his path. "Jed Walker," the bounty hunter said, his voice cold and steely. "I'm here to collect the reward." Jade sighed. He didn't have time for this. "I'm not going to make this easy for you," he said, his hand hovering near his gun. "Easy or hard, it doesn't matter to me," the bounty hunter replied, leveling his rifle. "Dead or alive, you're coming with me." The sun beat down on the dusty street as the two men faced each other, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Jade knew this was just the beginning. The whole town was against him and time was running out. He had to clear his name or he'd end up in a pine box before sundown. Jade knew he couldn't outrun the bounty hunter on foot. He needed to create a distraction. He glanced at a stack of wooden crates near the livery stable. An idea sparked in his mind. "All right," Jade said, raising his hand slightly. "You got me, just don't shoot." The bounty hunter smirked, lowering his rifle slightly. "That's what I wanted to hear." As the bounty hunter stepped closer, Jade suddenly kicked out, sending the stack of crates tumbling down. The loud crash startled the bounty hunter, giving Jade the split-second advantage he needed. He dove behind Goldie, pulling her around to use as cover. The bounty hunter fired, the bullet whizzing past Jade's ear. Jade returned fire, his shot hitting the bounty hunter's rifle, sending it flying from his hands. The bounty hunter cursed, scrambling for cover. Jade seized the opportunity, leaping onto Goldie's back and galloping out of town. He could hear the bounty hunter shouting behind him, but he didn't look back. He rode hard, pushing Goldie to her limits. He needed to reach Widow's Creek before the bounty hunter caught up, or worse, before Sheriff Brody decided to intervene. As he rode, he considered his options. He couldn't trust anyone in Dusty Gulch. The sheriff was likely involved, the townspeople were suspicious, and the bounty hunters were closing in. He was alone, but Jade No Name Walker had faced worse odds before. He was a survivor. He would clear his name even if it meant taking down the entire town to do it. He spurred Goldie onward, the wind whipping through his hair as he raced toward Widow's Creek and the truth. He would carve his name into history one way or another. The sun was beginning to set and time was running out. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple as Jade rode toward Widow's Creek. The landscape grew more rugged, the scrub brush giving way to towering pines. He knew he was getting close. He slowed Goldie to a trot as he approached the creek, the sound of rushing water echoing through the trees. He spotted Henderson's cabin nestled in a small clearing, a plume of smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was there. Jade dismounted, tying Goldie to a tree. He drew his gun, approaching the cabin cautiously. He peered through a window, the glass grimy and cracked. Inside, a figure sat by the fire, their back to the window. He couldn't make out who it was, but they were definitely not Henderson. He kicked the door open, his gun raised. "Hold it right there," he shouted. The figure jumped up, turning to face him. It was a woman, her face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She held a rifle, her eyes wide with surprise. "Who are you?" Jade demanded, his voice firm. The woman didn't answer. She raised her rifle, aiming it at Jade. "I don't want to hurt you," Jade said, trying to reason with her. "I just want to know what you're doing here." The woman hesitated, her finger twitching on the trigger. "This is my home," she said, her voice trembling. "This was Henderson's home," Jade corrected. "He's dead, murdered." The woman lowered her rifle slightly. "I know," she said softly. "I found him." Jade lowered his gun a fraction. "Then you know I didn't do it." I don't know what to believe," the woman said, her eyes filled with fear. "Everyone says you're the one who killed him." "Everyone's wrong," Jade said, stepping closer. "I'm being framed, and I need your help to prove it." He could see the doubt in her eyes, but also a flicker of hope. He had to convince her. His life depended on it. The woman who introduced herself as Sarah was the only chance Jade had. "Why are you here, Sarah?" Jade asked, holstering his gun. "Henderson was my friend," she replied, her voice regaining some strength. "He helped me when I had nowhere else to go. I came to say goodbye." Jade nodded, understanding her grief. "Did you see anything unusual, anyone suspicious?" Sarah shook her head. Just Henderson lying there," she shuddered. "Think hard, Sarah," Jade urged. "Anything at all could help." She closed her eyes, concentrating. After a moment she opened them, a flicker of realization in her gaze. "There was something," she said slowly, "by the fireplace, a small piece of paper. I almost threw it away." Jade's heart quickened. "Where is it?" Sarah led him to the fireplace, where a pile of ashes lay smoldering. She sifted through the ashes, her fingers blackened with soot. Finally, she pulled out a small, charred piece of paper. It was barely legible, but Jade could make out a few words. "Meet midnight, Old Mine Brody." His suspicions were confirmed. Sheriff Brody was definitely involved. The old mine, that was where the land deal had probably gone wrong. That was where Henderson had been killed. "Do you know where this old mine is?" Jade asked. Sarah nodded. "It's a few miles north of here, abandoned years ago." "We need to go there," Jade said, his voice determined. "That's where we'll find the proof we need." Sarah hesitated. "It's dangerous, Jade." "I know," he said, "but it's the only chance we have. Either we clear my name or we both end up dead." He could see the fear in her eyes, but also a growing resolve. Sarah was a woman of courage. She would help him. Together they would expose Sheriff Brody and bring him to justice. The old mine was their next stop. The clock was ticking. The ride to the old mine was tense. Jade and Sarah rode in silence, their senses on high alert. The moon cast long, eerie shadows, making every rustle of leaves sound like an approaching enemy. Sarah led the way, her knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. They followed a narrow, overgrown trail, the path barely visible in the darkness. Finally, they reached the mine, a gaping hole in the side of a hill surrounded by crumbling wooden structures. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. Jade dismounted, drawing his gun. "Stay here," he told Sarah. "It could be dangerous." Sarah shook her head. "I'm coming with you. I want to see this through." Jade nodded, knowing he couldn't dissuade her. Together they approached the mine entrance, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Inside, the mine was dark and claustrophobic. They lit a lantern, its flickering light revealing the rough-hewn walls and the remnants of mining equipment. The air was thick with dust, making it difficult to breathe. They ventured deeper into the mine, their senses on high alert. The silence was broken only by the occasional drip of water and the scurrying of unseen creatures. Suddenly they heard a noise, a muffled voice coming from deeper within the mine. Jade signaled Sarah to stop and they crept forward cautiously. They rounded a corner and saw a small chamber lit by a single lantern. Inside, Sheriff Brody was talking to another man, his face hidden in shadow. "I told you to take care of Henderson," Brody was saying, his voice angry. "Now Walker's sniffing around and everything's falling apart." "I'm handling it, Sheriff," the other man replied, his voice low and menacing. "Walker won't be a problem for much longer." Jade's blood ran cold. He had his proof. But now Brody knew he was there. They were trapped. Before Jade could react, the other man spun around, his gun drawn. Jade and Sarah were caught in the open. Well, Brody sneered, stepping into the light. "Looks like our little mouse hunt has come to an end." The other man, a hulking figure with a scarred face, grinned menacingly. "Time to tie up loose ends, Sheriff." Jade knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. He had to think fast. He pushed Sarah behind him, ready to defend her with his life. "I heard everything, Brody," Jade said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "You killed Henderson for his land." "He was getting in the way," Brody shrugged, his face devoid of emotion. "And you, Walker, were just a convenient scapegoat." "It won't work," Jade said. "I'll make sure the whole town knows what you did." Brody laughed. "Who's going to believe a wanted murderer? Besides," he added, glancing at the hulking figure beside him, "you won't be around to tell anyone." The hulking figure lunged forward, swinging a heavy pickaxe. Jade ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow. He fired his gun, the bullet hitting the figure in the shoulder. The figure roared in pain, stumbling backward. Brody returned fire, bullets ricocheting off the walls of the mine. Jade and Sarah scrambled for cover, hiding behind a pile of discarded mining equipment. They were trapped in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Jade knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. He had to find a way out, a way to turn the tables on Brody and his henchmen. But how? Suddenly, Sarah whispered in his ear, "There's another way out, through the old tunnel." An old tunnel, it was a long shot, but it was their only chance. Jade nodded, grabbing Sarah's hand. "Let's go." They crawled through the darkness, hoping the old tunnel would lead them to safety. But they knew Brody wouldn't let them escape that easily. The hunt was far from over. The old tunnel was even darker and more treacherous than the mine itself. They crawled on their hands and knees, the air thick with dust and the smell of mildew. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever with no end in sight. Just as they were about to lose hope, they saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. They quickened their pace, emerging from the tunnel into a small, hidden cave. They were safe for now, but they knew Brody wouldn't give up easily. They needed to get back to Dusty Gulch and expose him, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. They needed help. Jade thought of the bartender, the man who had given him the first clue about the murder. Maybe he could trust him. "We need to go back to town," Jade said. "I know someone who might be able to help us." Sarah hesitated. "Are you sure you can trust him?" "I don't know," Jade admitted, "but it's our only chance." They made their way back to Dusty Gulch, arriving just before dawn. The town was still asleep, the streets deserted. They headed straight for the Rusty Spur saloon, hoping to find the bartender. The saloon was empty, the tables overturned and the glasses shattered. Something was wrong. "Hello," Jade called out, his voice echoing through the empty saloon. "Anyone here?" Suddenly, a voice spoke from the shadows. "Looking for me, Walker." Jade spun around, drawing his gun. The bartender stepped out of the shadows, his face grim, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Sheriff Brody and his hulking henchmen. "I thought you were different, Hank," Jade said, his voice filled with disappointment. "I did what I had to do to survive," Hank replied, avoiding Jade's gaze. "Brody offered me a good price for my silence." Jade's heart sank. He had been betrayed. Now they were completely alone. Brody had played them perfectly. There was no escape. They were trapped with nowhere to run. The final showdown was about to begin. "It's over, Walker," Brody said, his voice cold and triumphant. "There's nowhere left to run." Jade knew Brody was right. They were trapped in the saloon, surrounded by enemies, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He pulled Sarah behind the overturned bar, using it as a shield. "Stay down," he told her. "This is going to get ugly." He glanced around the saloon, assessing their options. The windows were boarded up, the doors locked. There was no escape. They were going to have to fight their way out. He reloaded his gun, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but he refused to give up. He had come too far to let Brody win. "I'm giving you one last chance, Walker," Brody shouted. "Surrender, and I promise you a quick death." Jade laughed, a hollow, defiant sound. "I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees, Brody." Brody sighed, "So be it." He signaled his henchman, who charged forward, firing his gun. Jade returned fire, the bullet hitting the henchman in the chest. The henchman stumbled backward, collapsing to the floor. Brody fired again, the bullet grazing Jade's arm. Jade winced in pain, but he didn't let it slow him down. He ducked behind the bar, reloading his gun. He knew this was his last stand. He had to take down Brody or he and Sarah were doomed. He took a deep breath, preparing himself for the final confrontation. The clock was ticking down to 0. He peeked over the bar, spotting Brody standing in the doorway, his gun aimed at him. This was it, the moment of truth. He was going to carve his name into history one way or another. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the dusty street. The final battle was about to begin. Just as Jade was about to make his move, they heard the sound of approaching horses. A posse. Brody had rallied the townspeople to his side. "Looks like you're out of time, Walker," Brody sneered. "The whole town is here to see you hang." Jade peeked through a crack in the boarded-up window. The street was filled with armed men, their faces grim and determined. They were surrounded. He turned to Sarah, his face grim. "It's been an honor fighting alongside you," he said softly. Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with tears. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to." Brody kicked the door open, stepping into the saloon. "All right, men," he shouted, "get him." The posse surged forward, firing their guns. Jade and Sarah ducked behind the bar, returning fire. The saloon erupted in chaos, bullets flying everywhere. Jade knew they couldn't hold out for long. The posse was too numerous, their firepower overwhelming. They needed a miracle. Suddenly, he had an idea. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey, smashing it against the bar. The saloon filled with the strong scent of alcohol. "Sarah," he shouted, "the lantern." Sarah understood immediately. She grabbed the lantern, swinging it toward the spilled whiskey. The flames ignited, spreading rapidly across the floor. The saloon was engulfed in flames, the heat intense. The posse recoiled in horror, retreating from the burning building. Jade grabbed Sarah's hand, leading her toward the back door. They burst out of the saloon, coughing and choking from the smoke. The posse was waiting for them, their guns raised, but the flames had created a diversion, giving them a chance to escape. They were still outnumbered, but now they had a fighting chance. The battle for Dusty Gulch had just begun. Jade and Sarah ran through the dusty streets, dodging bullets and leaping over obstacles. The posse was hot on their heels, their faces contorted with anger. They reached the edge of town, seeking cover behind a row of abandoned wagons. Jade peeked around the corner, spotting Brody leading the charge. "This ends here, Walker," Brody shouted, his voice filled with rage. Jade knew he had to confront Brody. He couldn't let him continue to terrorize the town. He turned to Sarah. "Get out of here," he said. "Find Goldie and get to safety." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." "You have to," Jade insisted. "I need you to be safe. I'll find you later, I promise." Sarah hesitated, but she knew Jade was right. She nodded, disappearing into the shadows. Jade took a deep breath, stepping out into the open. "Let her go, Brody," he said, his voice steady. "This is between you and me." Brody smirked. "You're a fool, Walker. You can't win." "Maybe not," Jade replied, "but I'm not afraid to die trying." Brody raised his gun, firing a shot. Jade dodged the bullet, diving behind a nearby wagon. He returned fire, hitting Brody in the arm. Brody roared in pain, dropping his gun. Jade seized the opportunity, charging toward him. He tackled Brody to the ground, pinning him beneath him. "It's over, Brody," Jade said, his voice low and menacing. "You're going to pay for what you've done." Brody struggled beneath him, his face contorted with rage. "You can't prove anything," he spat. "No one will believe you." Just then the townspeople began to gather around, witnessing the confrontation. The storekeeper, the bartender, and several other townspeople who had previously been afraid to speak out now watched, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Jade knew he had to act fast. "He killed Henderson," Jade shouted, his voice echoing through the street. "For his land. He wanted to build a railroad through Widow's Creek, and Henderson wouldn't sell." Brody struggled beneath him, his face red with anger. "He's lying," he yelled. "He's a murderer. He killed Henderson himself." Jade looked at the townspeople, his eyes pleading. "I was framed. I've never even been to Widow's Creek before. Ask Sarah, she found the body." Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "It's true," she said. "Jade didn't kill Henderson. I found a note at the cabin. It mentioned Brody and the old mine." The storekeeper spoke up, his voice hesitant but clear. I heard Brody talking about a land deal gone wrong. He said Henderson was standing in his way. The bartender, Hank, looked down in shame, avoiding everyone's gaze. He knew he had made a mistake. Jade turned back to Brody, his eyes filled with anger. Why, Brody? Why did you do it? Brody spat in Jade's face. Because I deserved that land, I built this town, I made it what it is today, and Henderson was going to ruin it all. The townspeople gasped, shocked by Brody's confession. They had trusted him, respected him. Now they realized he was a monster. Jade stood up, stepping away from Brody. He looked at the townspeople, his voice filled with conviction. He's a liar and a murderer, he said. He doesn't deserve to wear that badge. The townspeople looked at each other, their faces filled with anger and betrayal. They had been lied to, manipulated, and betrayed by the man they had trusted most. The truth was out. The time for justice had come. The clock had run out on Brody. The townspeople surged forward, grabbing Brody and dragging him to the town jail. They had been wronged, and they were determined to see justice served. "We trusted you, Brody," one of the townspeople shouted. "You betrayed us all." Brody struggled against their grasp, his face filled with fear. "You can't do this," he yelled. "I'm the sheriff." But the townspeople were deaf to his pleas. They had seen the truth, and they were no longer afraid of him. They threw Brody into the jail cell, slamming the door shut. He was finally behind bars where he belonged. Jade watched as the townspeople took control of their town, their faces filled with a newfound sense of purpose. They had stood up to corruption and won. He turned to Sarah, his heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "I couldn't have done this without you." Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with admiration. "You showed them the truth, Jade. You gave them the courage to fight back." Just then a bounty hunter approached, his face grim. "I guess I was wrong about you, Walker," he said. "Looks like you're not a murderer after all." Jade shrugged. "Posters can be wrong," he said with a wry smile. The bounty hunter nodded, turning to leave. "Good luck to you," he said. Jade watched as the bounty hunter disappeared into the crowd. He knew his name was cleared. He was no longer a wanted man. He had carved his name into history, not as a murderer, but as a hero. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over Dusty Gulch. The town was finally at peace, free from the grip of corruption. But what about Jade? What would he do now? Would he stay in Dusty Gulch, or would he continue his journey? The choice was his. The clock had stopped ticking. Jade walked to the edge of town, looking back at Dusty Gulch. The townspeople were already rebuilding, their spirits lifted by their newfound freedom. He had helped them, but now it was time to decide what to do with his own life. He looked at Sarah, who stood beside him, her eyes filled with hope. He had come to Dusty Gulch seeking nothing but a quiet drink, but he had found something far more valuable, a reason to stay. "What will you do now, Jade?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. Jade smiled. "I think I'll stick around for a while," he said. "This town needs a new sheriff." Sarah's face lit up with joy. "Really?" she asked. Jade nodded. "I may not have a name," he said, "but I know right from wrong, and I'm not afraid to stand up for what's right." Sarah threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "I knew you'd stay," she said. Jade looked out at the town, his heart filled with a sense of belonging he had never felt before. He had come to Dusty Gulch as a drifter, a man with no name. But he was leaving as a hero, a man who had carved his name into the history of the town. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, dangers, and hardships. But he was ready to face them, knowing he had the support of the townspeople and the love of Sarah by his side. He mounted Goldie, taking one last look at the town. He wasn't just Jade, no-name Walker anymore. He was Jed Walker, the new sheriff of Dusty Gulch, and he was ready to serve and protect his new home. The sun shone brightly, illuminating the path ahead. His journey had just begun. Well, the end.